Our next guest says that the outcome of the Trans Mountain Court decision is a consequence of federal governments, in his opinion, having failed to define what constitutes adequate consultation with Indigenous communities. Joining us from Calgary for reaction is Dennis McConaghy. He's former Executive Vice President of Pipeline Strategy and Development at TransCanada, one of the giants of the industry. Dennis McConaghy, thank you very much for joining us. I'll begin by asking you what I've asked the other guests at the beginning of our conversations, your reaction to this decision.
Well, this decision is an utter abomination. It is going to be enormously injurious and very difficult to recover from. 2 points to be made. The first part of this decision is a fundamental second guessing of the scoping that has been in place for this project close to 5 to 6 years. And the authorities of the NEB, this court has second guessed that they should have taken a more expansive view of what their jurisdiction was, given that the effects that they were concerned about were more likely going to be taken up in the process under the jurisdiction of the Department of Transport when they actually were going to use tankers. So that in and of itself is an astonishing decision given the length of time that the existing scope of this project was carried out and how many years, including the support of ultimately the federal government on the NEB decision. That's an astonishing part. The second part is again, the second guessing of courts about what constitutes adequate consultation. Just as you found in your dialogue with the First Nation representative, it's almost impossible to get a definition of what is it that would ever constitute adequate consultation. And surely adequate consultation doesn't mean changing your mind because the disgruntled, whomever they are against the recommendation of the due process of not only the statutorily empowered regulator, but also the democratically elected government. Consultation, the government of Canada, and this is not just the current administration but prior ones, needed to define more precisely what it was represented by and not leave it to the vagaries of the court. And this Federal Court of Appeal invoked other references to Supreme Court standards. You know, I challenge anyone to find that those things have any precision and any objectivity to the extent that people can say, well, what is it? Because this is a real mess that we are now left with, and it'll be very interesting to see what the Minister of Finance has to say.
What does adequate consultation, what would it look like in your opinion?
Well, let's keep in mind, 43 First Nation communities actually had consensual benefit agreements with this project. That was a very high standard in and of itself that demonstrated not only adequate consultation, but also agreements on what constituted significant accommodation. Adequate consultation means what it always means. Here's a decision of the NEB, a recommendation. We as the government want to understand your reaction to that. That's what consultation means. That doesn't mean that the government of Canada is obliged to move to a position that is aligned with the implacably opposed. And so we're left with this idea that holding steadfast to a recommendation, even after you have consulted, is like a non-starter, is just an absolutely unworkable standard. So these are the kind of practical questions that now I think we're left as a country of having to legislate much more prescriptively, but that's moving forward into the future. Right now, what does Bill Morneau and the federal government do to persevere with this project, of which they're right on the cusp of spending $4.5 billion to acquire?
What would you like to hear from Bill Morneau later today?
In an ideal world, I'd like to hear him about what legal resorts the government of Canada is going to pursue in light of this decision. So the first thing we need to hear, is he going to appeal the decision or not? Is that where the federal government is? Beyond that, are they going to take the other route of quote unquote playing ball with the court and sending it back to the NEB to remedy the scoping issue, engage in another down the road exercise in consultation, all of which will cost time and money and add an enormous interest burden to this forlorn project. And so this is going to be very problematic. And I guess the third thing we're all anxious to hear from him is he going to close the deal?
We've heard for years now that the view of foreign corporations in many different sectors, not just the energy sector, but energy particularly, is pretty negative on this country in this sense, the seeming inability of the country to get major projects green-lighted. What does this decision do to foreign perception?
In two simple words, this is just dysfunction affirmed. Like the implications of this for foreign investment in major infrastructure in this Canada is absolutely horrific, because it says that you can go through a process for 6 years, including a recommendation by the federal government, and still be upended very late in the process based on what really amounts to second guessing of prior scoping decisions and relying on an absolutely ambiguous standard of quote-unquote adequate consultation. And so the effects of this are going to be enormous and overwhelmingly negative.
The government,
and the onus is going to be on this government or future ones to fix it.
The government is trying to retool the review process through, among other steps, Bill C-69, which is an act to enact the Impact Assessment Act, and also to create the Canadian Energy Regulator Act. Any thoughts on these steps? Will the passage of this bill help?
Well, I have been a long-standing critic of C-69. C-69 will not help. It will just affirm more of this endless regulatory process without, getting to, quicker cycle times of decisions, quicker decisions of whether we've got a national public interest determination quickly. C-69 is not going to help foreign investors want to, or actually even Canadian investors, taking on these kinds of projects. So C-69 has to be utterly rethought, and especially in the light of what has just occurred here. Because one thing C-69 does not do, it does not add any clarity to what constitutes adequate consultation, even though we now know it is one of the great question marks that's always going to surround any approval, because we always know that there's going to be some groups implacably opposed to these projects. They're going to try to take their shot in the courts. So C-69 needs to be utterly rethought. I know it's been passed by the House of Commons, it's in the Senate, but if this government was really trying to learn from this experience this morning, standing down from C-69 should be part of what they do.
The backdrop to all of this, of course, is an ever-evolving energy market, particularly in the United States, where U.S. oil exports continue to increase. The U.S. is becoming a more significant exporter of oil than it has been in the past, and the approval of LNG projects in the United States, some of which are actually functioning today. Put that in context to us. How should we view this development in Canada against that backdrop?
Well, I mean, obviously, if Trans Mountain is lost as a project, if that's where this ends up, we are down to really just two incremental pipeline projects, KXL and Enbridge Line 3. And they're going to play out largely under U.S. jurisdictions. This was the last project that was really in the hands of Canada to get right. Obviously, we're all waiting for a very significant decision that is in the hands of Shell about whether or not they're going to proceed with the Kitimat decision. And so we'll just await and see how they respond in light of this decision. There's also a lot of interest within the Western Canadian gas industry about recatalyzing a LNG export project, particularly to the port of Prince Rupert. How that could ever get done in the face of this event this morning is just going to be made much more difficult. And so Canada stands to lose not just by this ever-ending delay in getting market access for incremental oil sands production, but also potentially lose out on its enormous opportunity for LNG export. So again, none of those prospects are helped by this decision at all.
Dennis McConaghy, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Dennis McConaghy is former Executive Vice President of Pipeline Strategy and Development at TransCanada.